Good afternoon. Admin Rana Singh, thank you so much for inviting me, and distinguished faculty, uh, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and especially I want to thank a large number of my Sri Lankan students. I'm now a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, and a large number of your students, they have been with me for the last 15 years, including 2 current ones. So I bring a lot of regards from the 2 Sri Lankan officers. They're doing very well at the Naval Postgraduate School. And so here I am speaking to you. If you see that this is slightly a different, very different topic, one of the words that has not been said since morning is the word nuclear. And if you see everything that has been talked since morning, you fit this word nuclear, and you look at the title that this is the title given to me by you, sir. So therefore, I stuck to what you have said. If I disappoint you very late in the day and kind of give you a dismal picture, it's not my fault. I'll try to be as entertaining as possible at 4 p.m. The reason is that there is nothing one could speak about nuclear issues that can be kosher, so I will try to focus more on, in the end, opportunities, but unfortunately we have more challenges, as many of the speakers before me have said. So one part of the very title, subtitle, Challenges and Opportunities, actually refers to the very paradox of the nuclear age, which is with the advent of the nuclear bomb. There were many quotations that were said at the time, but I was reminded of a quotation from Einstein, who said that with the advent of nuclear weapons, everything has changed except the way we think. And you will notice that with all the things that you have been hearing since morning, and I will try to situate that. So my hope is that in the 15 minutes allotted to me, I will try to equally and go over, rather provoke you more, because each one of them can be unfolded into a long lecture. So I will first give you some of the trends which is on the politics of the current times. And then, because given the fact that you are all military officers, I thought it's not just the politics of the time, but equally important is how the statecraft and how the strategy has been affected by the politics, nuclear politics. And finally, I hope to situate that a little bit, if the time permits, to excite you a little bit more by applying it to the region that you belong, particularly the ongoing India-Pakistan rivalry that could turn into conflict. For every word, Admiral, that you mentioned about naval modernization, and the dynamics happening in the Indian Ocean, that might affect Sri Lanka, and I thought that I'll add that as the last part of my presentation. So, how do you do this? Change like this? Or this is how it changes? Middle? Yeah. Okay. Should I point here? Okay. So this is referred to something called the second nuclear age, and we live in the age, when we refer to the second nuclear age, which has been roughly talked about, we are actually talking about the post-Cold War era. Now, the first nuclear age is referred to generally in the Cold War era, where the politics actually grew, and the very notion of nuclear deterrence shaped up. But in the second nuclear age is referred to when the whole regional nuclear dynamics moved towards the region. And that is what we are talking about. So we've been hearing since morning, from bipolar to multipolar. You've been heard so many times before. But what impact is that it is not any more dyadic relationship between 2 countries alone, which is oftentimes referred to as strategic trilemma, that one country affects the other, and the other country affects the other, and that sort of effect into a cascading effect in the region that you've heard so many times. The innovative technology, some of which you heard in this morning, is now changing the dynamics in the 21st century in manners where the classic nuclear deterrence, as we knew in the first nuclear age, may no longer be relevant. And the third fact is the rise of non-state actors. I heard the chair today and this morning as well. More focused discussion had been related to the rise of nationalism within state, or right-wing nationalism within state. But I think this is another factor where the rise of non-state actors in the milieu of interstate relations has made today's politics and interstate relations so complex. Already, as you've been hearing since morning, you add nuclear weapons into the whole mix, that goes pretty crazy. And that's what I'm trying to sort of do here by saying. Now, if you look into this slide, you will see that those were the fundamentals of the nuclear age. On the left side, you will see the slide as it was appearing in the time when in the first nuclear age. And on the right side, you see what has changed now, the trend line change now. So the word absolute weapon came immediately after the nuclear Hiroshima and the Nagasaki bomb came out. And Bernard Brody was one name, because you're students of strategy, you should know this name. He wrote a book called Absolute Weapon, which actually questioned the very fact, what is the role of the military under the advent of nuclear weapons? His famous quote essentially was, that henceforth the role of the militaries is not to fight and win war, but to prevent war. And therefore, the very fact the nuclear taboo began from that element. And then we came to a point about 20 years later around the time when eschewing the spread of nuclear weapons became so important. And the core of that was the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, enforced in 1970. One part of that treaty was that it really created between haves and have-nots, as you must be familiar at the time. And there were three countries, specifically, there were others, but three countries continued to become what was called the outlier countries: India, Pakistan, and Israel. But that was the question, was that it was about spread of nuclear weapons, and therefore stability became a more important factor in the first stage. And then lately, the late part of the Cold War ending and the turn of the 20th century was the element that crude devices could be done if non-state actors could actually get hand into, which is just totally unacceptable to have this kind of technology or this kind of lethal material in their hands, which was where the nuclear security became part of the nuclear politics. What did change is in the right-hand corner, that even despite all those fears that have been talked about, those countries that possess nuclear weapons, the salience of nuclear deterrence in their national security policies continues to date. No one wants to give that up. In the United States, we still are waiting for President Trump's new administration's nuclear posture review. Even President Obama's Prague vision talked about, his vision to eliminate nuclear weapons to reduce the salience. In reality, it never happened. The second element that is now we see in this stage, and as distinct to the first stage, where it was more normative on spread of nuclear weapons was bad. Now we see the spread of nuclear weapons is between who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. So there's a good proliferator and there's a bad proliferator. And that is this distinction between exceptionalism and trying to create a criteria so that this dangerous weapon could not be used inadvertently, or technology spread in a responsible manner should come to a close. That particular factor is the one that has affected the South Asian region most. And that is as a result of United States' exceptional deal to India under what's called the Hyde Act. The implication of this good and bad proliferator is very significant. And I'll say a little. And then, of course, is the non-state actors, where states continues to use proxies, etc. So, because these non-state actors could have their own agenda, the life of their own. You heard Pakistani general speaking this morning about how difficult it became for them in 30, 40 years of time. And then, of course, when they run amok, the possibility of nuclear material getting into the hands is something which just cannot be ruled out, even if the states are controlling and managing nuclear security in 4 summits that we saw during the President Obama's age. Now we come on to the new aspect about it. What is the change character of warfare as a result of current times? I just mentioned to you that basically states still continue to use nuclear weapons in terms of victory and defeat. This is exactly something very new in the. So some states want to fight a conventional war under the nuclear overhang. Shortly before I end the presentation, I will show you what the risks of such a strategy to fight a war and win it too, when the 2 armed countries are having nuclear weapons. What are the risks associated? I'll show you in a minute. But when I mentioned about the good and the bad proliferator, here is some point that you need to understand. I need to really qualify here. So what happened was that in the nuclear age, the outlier state were being forced to come into the regime. That was the normative thing, to become part of the regime. But that changed. That changed in a way because it became who is my ally and who is not my ally. So what we saw in the nuclear age was that, one, there were 5, as you well aware, there are 5 nuclear weapon states, part of nuclear politics, who are sort of recognized in the de jure sense because under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and you know those 5 countries are. So United States decided that in order to balance against China, they could partner with an outlier state, which was not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to balance against a de jure nuclear weapon state, China. So one nuclear weapon state, in order to balance against another nuclear weapon state, allows an exceptional position to an outlier state to balance against a nuclear weapon state, which in turn create a situation for another outlier state, Pakistan, security. So you can see how the dynamics has changed into 4 countries. Previously, it used to be all outlier states under forming and some kind of a normative, some kind of a criteria-based system to come. That has changed into merit-based and exceptional-based. The result of that is that an armament race has been induced in the region. Ever since this act happened, this was in 2008, it's almost like now, we're talking about 8-9 years from now. India and Pakistan have now introduced strategic triad. At least both countries are sitting in 10 different delivery means, including a naval-based and sea-based deterrent that both countries have introduced. And Admiral, thank you for introducing that. I will unfold a little bit on that part because that is what is going to affect Sri Lanka, and that has not been brought. So allow me, sir, a minute to explain that part. This is an important dynamics in the nuclear politics in the region that is affected, apart from many other things, with paucity of time I cannot talk about, the politics and conference of disarmament, on nuclear supplier group, FMCT, and other issues. I'll pause that for a moment. I hope you'll have questions. I'll be very happy to answer that. I recently did a course last year in what was called the Change Character of Warfare at Oxford University, and I thought I will actually lay that part as to how this politics change has affected the new times. I mentioned early on that nuclear deterrence and the change character of warfare are not matching each other. And here, I have a critique of India and Pakistan both, because both the countries are actually investing in old, outdated technology and outdated strategy that looking forward is not going to be effective. And therefore, this morning when I heard, Professor, you're mentioning about what should states be investing in. States should be smart to invest in technology. I am actually using your argument, turning it into a very different argument by saying what makes good strategic sense when you have so much of technological availability in the country. These are the 4 major changes: actors, methods, environment, and information age. I talked about violent extremist organization as non-state actors. This is what they do. They have the power to draw 2 states into war at the time and place of own choosing, and just like what happened in 2001 and 2 and 2008 in Mumbai attack. That's the biggest danger. And then they are quite capable of exacerbating existing regional tensions. Every time India and Pakistanis have tried to bring about any peace and détente initiative, you will find that one odd action happens that completely throws that under the bus. And therefore, the third element continues that non-state actors may have access. I already mentioned about that. But more importantly, what is the role of nuclear weapons in deterrence in the era of hybridity as the major change in methodology of war? This has also been referred sometimes as gray zone conflict, also called as competition short of armed conflict by using proxies as plausible deniability. Now that's not called terrorism, but this is what is going on very recently in our contemporary times. This itself is a very big subject under study in most of the universities in the United States. I'll be very happy to answer questions, but for shortage of time, I will not use. But one of the means is to use cyber attack infrastructure, banking, swift attack, fifth columnist. I participated in a war game very recently where I was playing the bad guy, and I created so much of mayhem in the target country that country just could not prove that the adversary country was actually doing that. So much of coercive element was done that the country literally collapsed in the process. Propaganda and using multiple domestic challenges. So military force, show of force, coercive deployment. You could use this with conventional forces, and you could use this. Is my time over or what? Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that is my, all right. So this is the third point, is the environment. I think it's been talked about that it is moving from periphery, from land to the maritime, and many people have already talked about this. I wanted to bring very quickly a slide, if you give me 1 minute, and to see how all this has actually done. The important change that has happened is the last bullet in this way, introduction of nuclear weapons into the maritime space, which has posed three distinct kind of challenges. The first challenge is, what is the operational concept under which the nuclear navies of India and Pakistan will be operating in the northern Arabian Sea, in a very congested sea that was just mentioned by Admiral before my presentation. That's a very serious complication, whether they're going to be continuous patrol at sea, or this is going to be a bastion strategy, or a hybrid mix of both. The second challenge will be the survivability questions under this congested sea. There could be incident at sea, which could affect Sri Lanka in many ways. Port calls will be affected. The traditional roles of the Navy with nuclear weapons would be affected in one way or the other. And the third element will be a peculiar nature, just in nuclear command and control, not just a centralized versus decentralized control element, but in the case of Navy, there'll be two kind of command system. One is called what's called NC2 system. I can answer more questions on that if that is the case. And finally, we are actually moving into the information age. Let me just quickly go over as to what this concept of nuclear overhang can actually do so. This is what happens in modern day of warfare, and which is where the era of India and Pakistanis are now changing. What you see in this slide is a typical proxy war turning into a conventional war in South Asia. You can see that if there's a continuous proxy war going on, there could be counter-proxy operation in the lower end. And you can see from the lower end that you have space leading on to a nuclear war at some stage. What this slide does is give you a very linear sort of a picture, as if there are discrete zones and all. In reality, it is not discrete. It is three-dimensional in the sense. Now I change this into the time and days on the vertical bar, and you can see the same on the horizontal bar with convention to nuclear. So what happens if proxy wars continues? There could be any trigger event at any stage that can happen, just like Mumbai or any other thing. So you can see on the horizontal bar that the time is compressed, and then you would be having force mobilization at certain time. Now this is the time where political dithering could be done. Remember that these are two nuclear armed countries in the process of war. Hostilities may start and operational space is somewhere available. So you have enough days from 0 to days and weeks for diplomatic intervention, political dithering, or halting of operations at any time. Before any time you could think that nuclear weapons could be deployed, and somewhere where this bar is there, you could see that there could be possibility of nuclear exchange happening once it is deployed. So you have days and time available to them. But what this modern technological innovation and information age has done today is to actually bring about the idea that, operational space could be compressed because of technology. And Pakistan in the process introduced tactical nuclear weapon. So you have two elements going on. One is the compression of the mobility, and the other is the introduction of the battlefield nuclear weapons in the process. Whether they introduce it in the battlefield or not, the very fact that they have the weapon in the arsenals, in terms of operation, it has to be thought about what's could happen. It will be much more difficult to pull it out from peacetime storage and take it into the battlefield. These are the difficulties, not just specific to Pakistan and India. This was exactly the case in the first nuclear age, where no answer was able to found. So the result of this element is that it actually brings the nuclear threshold very down, and a very number of days is very, very quickly in terms of crisis. So any land-based crisis, this could stabilize the crisis or not stabilize the crisis. This would push the stabilization on land towards maritime arena, where I just mentioned the three areas: operational concept, survivability question, and command and control questions, and increase incidents at sea happen. So I will just wind up with the last conclusion here, because I don't want to leave you dismal here. These are the challenges on the left side. But since we have technological innovations, the same thing can be used to ameliorate state-to-state relations, rather than relying on all these technologies and social media to actually whip up more emotions. These days have changed now. And again, we need to get the norm of non-proliferation back, to strengthen it in the face of, rather than having exceptional politics, it's about time that when NPT enters 50 years of its enforcement in 2020, it's about time that the solution to the outlier state must be found, rather than finding exceptionalism or something. There has to be either a criteria-based or some kind of solution to be found in the process. And then, of course, since Sri Lanka has taken a major lead here, I think the era of eschewing this conventional war is gone now. We need to get into a more advanced restraint arrangement between the states and all, in order to prevent a nuclear war. And I can say in one final word, I don't see a nuclear war happening in the region by either countries being irresponsible to press the nuclear button. But there is one thing that can happen once conventional war breaks out, as I just shown. The war of inadvertence can always lead to any crisis. Dr. Bill Perry, who's he's in Stanford University, and he and I talked a lot. He said, states could blunder into a war. Nobody would be foolish to press the button. But that's our age that we live in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.